All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today we're talking about how bureaucracy is successfully killing our hope of meeting the needs of society. It's ripe, it's rampant, it affects emergency management significantly, and your preparedness. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, thanks again for joining us here on the channel, and thank you very much for everybody continuing to give us ideas at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Good, bad, or indifferent, we get them all, we read them all, and we actually respond to every one of them. Except, of course, for the ones of late where everybody seems to be sending me ideas of saying, hi, I'm a social media expert, your SEO is not up to spec. Here's the 17 things I could do to your website to show you better. Would you like prices and programs? Like, I probably get 15 to 20 of these inquiries a day, either over on my parent company website at preparednesslabs.ca, on the podcast website at www.insidemycanoehead.ca, or simply through my email. I get this constant barrage of people who are telling me my site looks good, but it's not ranking well. And they're not even using proper English. Like, their grammar sucks. Like, folks, if you're going to try to get me to spend money with you, I would probably assume that you should work on grammar. And if it's not your first language, I love it, because I know the struggle of learning a second language. Grammarly exists. They've got a free version. This is not a rant. It's just selling. If you're going to try to convince me that you are a serious effort and you're a serious company and you have value, understanding grammar is probably a first step to success. But hey, you do you, and I'll keep deleting it until it looks good. I know, it's a lot of fun. But listen, today we want to talk about bureaucracy, right? We've seen a lot of examples lately in the news media about, latest reports coming out of the Argentinian chainsaw revolution, where their new leader has come in and absolutely hack and slash government regulations, policies, process, procedures, governance structures, frameworks, laying off thousands of excess capacity public servants, and basically hammering down the state to its role to serve the population, not being a self-licking ice cream cone or a beast or behemoth that needs constant feeding. Now, we see this in potential, and listen, I'll throw my comments out there now. We see in the incoming U.S. administration plans to launch an agency called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, run by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, who somehow are going to fire 50% or more of the public servants, move everything out of town. Obviously, they've done nothing. They've just promised, and we have to always wait and see. And everybody who's getting their hair on fire, including the recent announcements by Trump that he's going to put a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, understand all of this is just positioning before the actual talks start. It's basic bravado. It's like when you're in a lawsuit and somebody files this initial statement of claim that makes you sound like the devil incarnate. It's just the way the system works. So setting that aside, we've got a lot of promise coming out of the U.S. that they're saying they're going to attack what they're referring to as the deep state. I don't care what you call it. The governance structure, the governance model, the regulatory framework that keeps the public services running. You can call it by whatever nomenclature you want. They're saying they're taking a hack to it. I don't know what that looks like. You don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the actual outcome will be. And I don't know whether the beast that emerges or the snail that emerges will actually on a per capita basis be any more effective, or will it just do less with less money? We don't know. There's all kinds of possible outcomes. But the reason this is important to discuss now is because we're at a limit in the world where we've pretty much spent every dollar we can, right? The reality is that governments are probably spending the maximum amount of money they can. They've created all the realistically implementable, I love that word, revenue sources that they're out there. So really, as we sit here in most democratic nations around the world, Every likely possible revenue scenario has been incorporated. It has been transitioned. It has been created. And governments are spending and raking in a great deal of money, and they're spending a great deal of money. But what a lot of the people are reflecting, and this doesn't matter your political ideological focus, whether you're in Canada, the U.S., Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, libertarian, NDP, it doesn't matter. There's a general belief in the population that the level of service delivery by our public sector is falling. And it is not correlated to the number of resources we send. So as we continually send more and more resources to the center, to our governance framework, the services that we get for that seem to be diminishing. In reality, they are diminishing. But most people's impression is that they are diminishing. And so we're in a position of, I'm spending more and more money to get less and less services. Now, this podcast is grounded in the area of preparedness, so we're going to use the field of emergency management as a very real example, right? So when you think about emergency management, the literature talks at great length about 4 pillars, being the pillar of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, talking about it as a fiduciary duty in the public sector that they are commanded to during legislation. But the reality of it is we really can think in the simplistic level is there's 2 parts of emergency management. There's incident response and incident management. And the reason it's important to delineate between the two, because incident response is your traditionally known first responders. So when we talk about incident response, we're talking about police, fire, and EMS, right? We're talking about all of the regular systems that operate on a day-to-day within your city. I live in the city of Ottawa, slightly over 1 million people. We have a police, fire, and EMS system. They're responding to calls for service every day, all day. Fantastic people, got all the time in the world for them, right? That's incident response. That is not emergency management. I will argue with people who disagree with me. Some will say otherwise, but emergency management as a function is not police, fire, EMS. Emergency management as a function is incident management, which starts at the Emergency Operations Center. It starts using the ICS NIMS structure where you're in support of the on-ground incident commander. So if you have a significant incident, the 3 services that I spoke about in incident response will come together in something called unified command. And what unified command does means they're all falling under one person is being given on-scene command over what is happening in the disaster space. So in the affected population, in the affected area, usually this defaults to the senior fire chief on the ground. So the senior fire chief on the ground becomes the incident commander. So the incident commander on the ground, he is now the supported commander. So the Emergency Operations Center and all of the people involved in emergency management are the folks that work the system behind the scene that provide support to the incident commander who's on the ground executing the incident response task. The reason I say that is because when we talk about significant model changes, significant disruption, restructuring and reorganizing, we're not referring to doing that to the police department, the fire department, and the paramedic system. Though there's always hopes for efficiency and agility in areas like that, that's an incident response question. That's not something we're addressing in emergency management. We're addressing the side of the coin that deals with the management of the incident from a governance oversight perspective. So usually within an emergency operations center, and I've seen them run with 3 people, I've seen them run with 35, right? All kinds of TVs, or I've seen them run off a Hilroy Scribbler, and it does perfectly fine with a radio channel. Inside there, you have the decision makers. Now, the decision makers are always your elected officials in a democracy. The decision makers are not the emergency management professionals. Those are individuals who execute orders that they're given by the decision makers. So the decision makers would be your county reeve, your mayor, your council, your CAO, your appointed people who have been delegated authority within the local administration or law. So each region or area where you live has an emergency management bylaw, right? So if you go read that bylaw, it outlines who has the authority to do what, when an SOE, so a state of emergency, or sometimes it's called a SOL, a state of local emergency, has been enacted. The bylaw comes into an effect, and in that bylaw it outlines who has the authority to make what decisions, right? Very interesting piece. You should just read it for giggles, just to understand how this governance model is done. That model delineates at the local level. You take that up to the state level, you start to see an absolute exponential growth in bureaucracy. Now, some of the larger cities suffer from it too, but the vast majority of emergency management as a function, again, not incident response, but emergency management function at the local municipal level is largely done off the corner of the desk. It's usually a secondary duty of somebody, or if you're fortunate enough to have 1 to 1.5 FTE full-time equivalents there, that's it. That's the extent of emergency management at the local level. At the state and national level, it is a massive bureaucratic behemoth. You have alone in FEMA over 20,000 employees. Public Safety Canada has thousands of employees. There's over 10,000 in our border services alone. When you look at the size of the bureaucracy and the structure of the framework, it is an incredibly massive leviathan, resource-consuming beast. The reason I say that is we're sitting in a reality here in emergency management, and a lot of other genres and fields are facing the same thing, is that we're at that limit of taxpayer expenditure, right? So now we're playing the shuffle game, right? There's no more money for government. They have all the money they have. So if they want to add money to a pie, they're going to have to take the money away from another pie. So really what we're looking at is incrementalism. So emergency management has what it has. It has the resources it's going to get. It likely is not going to get anything notable of difference, and neither is literally any other area other than New World Order stuff. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So set that aside. So right now, if you look at emergency management, they're going to have to figure out how to deliver better services to the population, more agile services to the population, within the same resources. And that also, many times it raises the ire of alternate service delivery. It raises the ire of we need to, hack and slash. We need to cut programming. We need to cut support. And I'll give you an interesting example of why that's not always the case and why I don't think it's the case and why I remain an eternal optimist about this. I teach graduate education in emergency management. So I teach in a master's program. And often what I get is my master's students together, and we call it by different names, but I call it the 150 challenge. And I call it the 150 challenge because what we do is we look at a state or a provincial level government. So I say there's about 150 full-time equivalents, so human beings, working in the emergency management function. Again, remember, we're separating it from incident response. So when you look at that, I say, okay, right now we're allocating $110 million non-labor costs and 150 people. I want you, based upon all of your education to this point, and this is usually done near the end of the program in the capstone project, I want you to run a 150 challenge. I want you to design the system that would be the most efficient and the most effective if the only limitation I'm giving you is you understand emergency management as a function, you understand the literature and the doctrine. Now what I want you to do is design a system with that 150 people and within the resources I gave you and show me the product. And almost every time it has nothing to do or it does not resemble the existing system that they work under. So when you let the monkeys run the circus is the answer, what we get is a far more efficient and effectively designed system, which means we sometimes greatly, but on average, we increase the capacity of emergency management to deliver services. We increase the level of service to the population without adding one more dollar of resource cost, right? So this is an exercise I do. Now, I understand it is not a scientific exercise. I understand it is not scientifically defendable in a peer-reviewed journal, but it is an exercise of the mind. It is a cognitive stress test to look at how we organize things and is there a different way? I don't like to say a better way because then that means what we're doing now is dumb. I like to say, is there a different way where if I gave you the same amount of human beings and I gave you the same amount of money, that you could create a structure, governance, bureaucratic, regulatory, and administrative state structure that totally provided a far better service delivery, more efficient, more effective within the same resources if I didn't tell you you had to follow the structure that's established, right? What would it look like? For example, in a lot of places, people run EOCs with, you have the 4 section heads and then you have the different parts of each section. That's great. It's really cool and it works when you have all those resources and you have teams that can spell off. So if you can spell these people 8 hours on, 16 hours off, which is a minimum, you can try to go 12 and 12, but they'll be burnt out in a couple of days and pretty useless to you. So if you can create 3 teams to fill all of those seats, well, guess what? Good on you, but you're not reflective of normalcy, right? I've seen EOCs run at full speed, full operation with 4 people because the organization had 12 people available to dedicate to this function. So they created an EOC structure to execute the role of incident management with 4 people. And they did an exceptional job. They didn't need all of the ICS systems, right? So it's not a question of that ICS is bad. It's that it's the existing doctrine. The existing organizational and governance structure within ministries look like they do. I'm simply saying we're in a position where the reality of the world dictates that we are killing hope for future service delivery through expanding our bureaucracy and maintaining the existing bureaucracy we have. And I spoke a little bit earlier about world order. We're facing a changing world order. And what this simply means, if you're a reader of Ray Dalio or Peter Zion or Ian Bremner or some of the big thinkers that look at, evolutions and generational changes in the human condition, about every 70 or 80 years, humanity reorganizes itself, right? Our last reorganization was post-Second World War, or the Second World War, you could call it if you want to expand it, right? So really the 1940s was the last decade that we did a societal reorganization. The world powers emerged from World War II. You had the 2 superpowers. You had a reasonable world order. The Bretton Woods Agreement laid out how the world would work. If you're interested in why that, Peter Zion's book, The Accidental Superpower, goes into it wonderfully, or just Google Bretton Woods. But the idea is it set up how the world would work. The 2020s is humanity's next iteration of this. And we've done it every 70 or 80 years, traceable all the way back to when overseas trade happened, about 1400, when there was significant overseas trade around the world. So from 1400 forward, about every 70 or 80 years, humanity has gone through this societal reorganization. The world reorganizes. So countries are collapsed, overcome, conquered, come together, reorganize, make friends, create relationships, build alliances. And basically right now, the 2020s is the decade where nations around the world are jockeying for position to set the world up for the next 70 or 80 years, right? What that requires is the idea of globalism is dead and this world order of peacenik and all that. We're returning to what humanity's done for multi-generations and hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's a competition. which means countries are going to have to make investments in defense and security. That can be done in both military hard power, but it's also done through relationship negotiations, trade agreements, and reciprocal protection agreements. Economic security is required now because the free, wide open global trade world is now collapsing into some other form of regionalization with some global trade, but a dramatically increased level of piracy, of which nobody's really interested in doing much about. Then you're going to have agricultural security. You have to be able to feed your people, and you can't count on this wide open international trade for it to simply be available. I can order all of my grain from somewhere and it will just magically show up because the seas are free and open. And then you have organic resource and energy requirements. You need to be able to power and the basic metals and ores of the worlds and minerals that you need. And again, Peter Zion does a far better job than I do, of course, in outlining that. But there's 4 or 5 things that a country in the next 100 years is going to have to be able to either create and make for itself, or have pretty strong local regional agreements to provide that for itself. That's all taking from the public purse. That's all going to be additional money that every country is going to have no choice but to expend in the changing world order, which means existing systems are going to have to change. Part of the reason why Milei's Argentinian experiment is being so successful is he's imaging it in the future of where, yes, the public service has to deliver certain things that individuals and communities can't do for themselves. But we're only going to get it to do it at the most efficient way possible at an acceptable standard, right? And we're not going to let it continually and morph. I wrote a piece on Substack this morning. Follow me over there under Jeff Donaldson. I wrote a piece on Substack, and it was basically the argument that we usually start public sector operations, businesses, bureaucracy, and frameworks for a good idea, right? Something has occurred. Like, we started emergency management because the end of the Cold War, the end of the Civil War, the civil defense era, starting of climate change, reality of the impact of disasters, a whole bunch of things. Here in Canada, Public Safety Canada was created after the SARS pandemic in 2003. We realized we didn't have a coordinated government agency. The same as Jimmy Carter brought FEMA together through a whole bunch of other agencies in 1979, right? There was a reason why we did this, and it was intelligent, it was responsible, and it was the right thing to do. The problem was it was left to fester, and it has expanded. The good idea theory. We should expand it into this, expand it a little bit this way, grow this idea. And it becomes a self-growing child, right? It's going from the toddler that met the requirement to this adolescent that's consuming resources at an incredible rate, but is producing not an exponential growth in service delivery, but it's just getting bigger and bigger. The behemoth and the governance is huge. We've had a massive expansion in Canada, like a lot of countries have, in the level of our public service, right? Over the last 20 years, we're talking a huge level of growth. But when you look, was there a corresponding level of service increase? Or, as efficiency people like my previous career in supply chain management and looking and being an expert in lean supply design, if you add a 10% budget to an organization, you have a reason to expect a greater than 10% increase in services. It's not a 1-for-1. So as you increase the budget of FEMA by 100%, for example, as it's grown several times over, you would expect a greater than 100% increase in the level of service it provides. Otherwise, it's not being efficient with the dollars, right? That's a basic idea in governance. You can argue with me. Drop me a line at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca if you want to argue. But the point I'm making here is pretty simple. The behemoth beast is getting out of control. It's getting large. It's getting difficult to manage. And we're not going to be able to spend any more money on emergency management. So if we want the increased severity and frequency of disasters that everybody talks about, the worry about climate change and the increasing, as we're going to see exponentially more calls for roles for emergency management, you have to understand that's going to be in a framework where there is no more money for it. So what do you do? What do you do when a service is being called on more and more, but there's no more resources for it? Well, you can burn everybody out, which is what they're trying to do right now. But the reality is you're going to have to sit back and say, there needs to be a different way to deliver this service. My argument is, I think I know the way. I didn't write it in the piece, and I'm not going to say it here on the podcast. The idea is I think we need to get really smart individuals together to start looking at, if I have 150 people and $110 million to deliver emergency management in the state of New York, that is all I have. It doesn't matter what the demand is. It doesn't matter what the needs are from the population. So how can I design the most effective and efficient system by throwing the entire governance structure, the entire hierarchical organizational system, throw it dans la poubelle, as we say en français, throw it in the garbage and build something brand new? What would it look like? And I love the phrase, let the monkeys run the circus, because every time I've taken students and current practitioners in emergency management and given them this opportunity, they've delivered a pretty cool set of ideas. Now, this is a impractical, non-scientific exercise, but each and every time I have been amazed by the ideas that have been created by these individuals out of thin air, with just 5 or 6 incredibly focused and well-educated and smart individuals who work in the field, who do this incident management function, and realize and look at it, this entire governance structure is junk. If our job is to provide incident management services to the population, then the way we've got it organized is a hindrance. It's actually limiting and preventing our ability to deliver. That's the general outcome, is that the governance structure is a barrier and an obstacle to delivering top-level services to the population. So that's what I think it needs. Thank you very much for listening to this abbreviated show today at Inside My Canoe Head. We're putting up our first YouTube video later today. I hope you're going to like it. And then we're getting back to somewhat normalcy, creation of regular products coming out next week. A whole bunch of interesting things happening in the background. We'll tell you about it over the period of time. We're here. We've had an incredible year. The year-end stats will be out at the end of December. This is the largest growth that we've had in the last 3 months. I want to thank the hundreds and hundreds of new listeners who have come on board. And remember, the Substack article, the podcast, and the upcoming series of YouTube videos that are going to come out is all our free public community service. It will never have a paywall. It will always be free. It's based upon evidence. It's non-apocalyptic. I'm sorry, you're not going to need your bunker and your 2 years of food supply. Sorry to break it to you. Preparedness is free. It's a lifestyle, not a stockpile. We're here to help. We're here to provide evidence-based, research-based information to help people adopt a prepared life, take on a little bit more of self-reliance, become a little bit more self-sufficient, and create that community. Because remember, our key argument here is that the unit of measure of resilience is the community, not the individual and not the household. It is the community. And when we change that conversation, we have an exponential growth in how well we navigate exogenous shocks. So thank you very much. Stay tuned for lots more to come. And if you do us one favor, drop over, visit our website, share it with a friend. Take care. Stay safe.